Hi, my name is Michael Thomas. I'm the lead school psychologist for Alamance Burlington School System. I've worked in Alamance since 2008. Prior to that, I was working in South Carolina. So today we're going to talk a little bit about progress monitoring off grade level. Specifically, we're going to talk about the reasons why you would do that, important considerations for off grade level monitoring. We'll review some basic goal setting procedures for off grade level monitoring and review a few case examples as well as a few tools. So why would we monitor off grade level? Students who are performing well below their peers have foundational skill gaps typically, and you are able to identify that oftentimes with things like curriculum-based measurements or curriculum-based measures or computer adaptive tests. And if you can identify those basic skill gaps and monitor them, it really is helpful in providing you with context for understanding that student's academic failure, as well as understanding what's happening as they are responding or not responding. You can kind of see those basic skill gaps get filled or not and talk about how that impacts that grade level standard or skill. Okay, so let's talk about some considerations. So what grade level is the student in? That's going to make a difference as far as how far back you want to go. And also, there may be some limitations associated with grade level depending on the probe that you are using. What assessments are available to you? What tools do you have access to? IABS has a really good data decision rules document that can help teams begin to develop their own data decision rules that can be implemented consistently across the district. And that's really important, particularly when you're talking about off-grade level progress monitoring. So it's just a really helpful document with lots of tools embedded within it, but also just some examples of kind of some of the work's already been done, so you can look at that and see if it's specific enough, or if you need to perhaps get more specific. Those embedded tools would help you do that. So you need to consider how frequently can you realistically progress monitor? Do you have the capacity to do it? Typically at instructional level, we're looking at 1 to 2 weeks, and 1 to 2 times every week. And on grade level, typically about 1 to 2 times a month. And we would do those two things together, again, to monitor the student performance at that foundational skill level, and also monitor for generalization and growth or lack of growth up on the typical grade level measures. So for goal setting, it's pretty basic procedure. We define the typical or benchmark rate of improvement for the progress monitoring level. Determine how many weeks it will take the student to meet the progress monitoring level for that EOI benchmark standard. So you take the EOI goal minus the baseline, divide that by the typical rate of improvement for that measure at benchmark. And then that would give you how many weeks to go before you close the gap. So weeks to go is not an empirical term that I know of, but we use it locally just to kind of get everybody on the same page. So as far as the performance goal, typically we're going to make that ambitious when we're off grade level. So we want to either half the time that's expected. So if we say it's expected that it would take the student 20 weeks to catch up, half that, and then you would end up with 10 weeks. That's ambitious. Or you could take that benchmark rate of improvement for the probe that you're using at that grade level and multiply that by 1.5 or 2. That's also going to give you a goal, because you're going to be using an ambitious rate of improvement. Okay, so just an example here. I have a 5th grade student that was found to be instructional 3rd grade. So that survey assessment again showed 3rd grade, and that the benchmark typical rate of improvement would be used to calculate the time to meet the goal. Divide that by 2 and establish an ambitious goal. We would monitor again on 3rd grade 1 to 2 times a week, and then up on 5th grade to look for generalization 1 to 2 times a month. We would graph both of them, the instructional and the grade level. But we would, here in ABSS, we would typically draw out that 3rd grade EOI benchmark on that 3rd grade graph, so that we could visually demonstrate to the team, to the family, when that student is approaching the EOI benchmark standard and getting ready to move into 4th grade content. Just that visual representation can really help communicate what's happening, and it does help with context. Okay, so some things to consider at the time of referral. So for the kid like this, if they were making the growth at third grade and you decided they crossed that end of year benchmark and you're ready for them to go into fourth grade, then even if you had referred the kid at that point, you'd still need to go on and monitor that fourth grade level, because again, that context is really important. You're going to want to see if they can maintain that growth in fourth grade or not, because if they're, we'll go over an example here in a minute, but if you can get them to close the gap at third grade and get them to close the gap at the fourth grade, but you can't get them to close the gap at the fifth grade, you need to know that. And that's really important when we're looking at what kind of resources it takes to sustain that kind of growth, or even if the student responded to an intensive level of intervention. Okay. So again, we want to look and see, can they sustain it? And if they are able to access and grow, what's their performance? What percentile are they at? Now, this is just specific to the CBM in this one example, but as we talk about their response to intervention and how it compares to the overall plethora of data that you're looking at, it is important to know what's the performance level at any given grade level, so you can again provide that context. Okay, so this is a chart that we're going to use here. I'm going to show you here in a second, but Kelly Norell is one of our psychologists here in ABSS, and she kind of put together this one pager where we just took the technical data from, we have DIBELS up here, and then we have AIMSweb down here, where you have the benchmark levels, the risk indicators here, or the thresholds for risk. You have the progress monitoring rules for DIBELS. You have the rates of improvement down in the bottom left. You have the same information for AIMSweb Plus. So when you talk about implementing something like off-grade level progress monitoring, or really any kind of RTI model, it really is helpful to have one-pagers, to have tools that you can quickly access that help people make consistent decisions without having to hand calculate everything, going through the technical manuals. It decreases the opportunity to make mistakes. Okay, so this is I'm going to walk you through this case partly through a tool that was developed actually by an intern of ours a number of years ago that we've kind of modified over time, but it helps us to make consistent decisions. So for this kid, we talked about a fifth grade student who was going to be monitored in third grade. We're going to capture the baseline data, the data of the baseline, what that actual score was, what the end of year goal for the probe would be, what the typical rate of improvement would be, and then the number of weeks that are left in the school year. That gives us an expected target of 60 weeks, and then we half that, right? And then it gives us the goal rate of improvement of 1.66. So that all gets calculated here behind the scenes on a spreadsheet that we have, or we have a calendar countdown calculator essentially that tells us at any given time how many weeks are left. But we track our progress monitoring data here. We set our parameters with the baseline, the goal, and once we've plugged in the rate of improvement information, it just calculates the goal for us. So here we have that fifth grade student who's being monitored on third grade level. You have the baseline, you have the expected point in time where they'll cross that third grade end of year benchmark level and be ready for fourth grade material. And you can see that they're outgrowing that. They're growing at a rate faster than what we had expected, where we had an expected rate of improvement of 1.66, and what they actually are currently achieving is 3.81. We typically will also put the expected and achieved rates of improvement on the graph too, because that helps families, and we can capture that and bring that forward when we write our reports. Okay, so we're going to go up to the fifth grade level here. Same thing. We're going to enter the baseline data with the date, the baseline score, the end of year benchmark standard, the typical rate of improvement, and the weeks left in the year, and it'll give us our expected rate of improvement. So here we have that data laid out for us, where we have the benchmark performance in red, and in the blue is the raw scores that we collect, and that dotted black line would be the AIM line. And this is based on closing the gap within the course of a year. So there might be times when you you wouldn't ask for quite that much growth, but in this instance, we're going to look and see the student close the gap in third grade. We want to see how they do with fourth grade and see if they can, we can continue that growth on up to perhaps closing that final fifth grade gap by the end of the year. All of this should continue while you are referring. So if you had decided that you can't support the kind of intervention necessary to maintain this level of growth, you're exhausting your resources, team suspects a disability, and you're seeing progress in third and perhaps fourth grade, and you get to fifth grade and you realize, you know what, this is not generalizing. You probably need to ask some additional questions like what's their vocabulary like, what kind of background knowledge do they have, how are they doing in the classroom, what's their attendance look like, all the typical questions you would ask. You still need to look at that, but this gives you important information across multiple grade levels to really give you, again, good context on that student's response or lack of response. So another example in reading, I have a second grade student that was found to be below grade level. Specifically, the survey assessment showed that they were first grade, and the benchmark rate of improvement was used to calculate the time to meet the goal. Okay, same procedure, divide that by 2, and then you get the ambitious goal. Monitor in first grade phonemic segmentation 1 to 2 times a week. Monitor in second grade DORF 1 to 2 times a week, because that's where their peers are. And they were struggling to access the DORF and the nonsense word fluency passages, so that's why we ended up down at phonemic segmentation fluency. We're going to look for generalization and conduct an error analysis as we go, because that's going to really help us with that diagnostic piece. I'm going to graph both of those measures and again indicate the end of year benchmarks on the graph so we can see, get that big picture in terms of their response or lack of response. Same thing here. We've got the one pager that lets us look at the data that's going to be used to set the parameters for expected growth. So we have the baseline data, right? We have the benchmark across going horizontally across, and you can see that they met the goal pretty quickly. So then we move to nonsense word fluency at the second grade level, and you can see again they outperform the expected rate of improvement and are ready to go on to the next skill. So here, when we're looking at that sort of that next skill, or reading fluency, which is where their peers are at second grade, you can see that benchmark at the top, that horizontal red, or I think it's orange on this slide, but you can see that reference point, and you see the actual raw score data collected against that and against that dotted black line, that aim line, and you can see that it goes up and then down, but overall it is a slightly positive trend, but it's a shallow trend, and at best it's paralleling. So they're not really closing the gap, despite making gains with phonemic segmentation fluency and nonsense word fluency. They're not making those gains with oral reading fluency. And it's typical to see really fast growth with phonemic segmentation and with nonsense word, but then when we get to application with oral reading fluency, a lot of times it's really hard for kids who truly are struggling to maintain that growth, and often it's because they're still working on phonics beyond the nonsense word fluency or that CVC level. They're maybe stuck in advanced phonics somewhere. So you need to take a look at your instruction. Are you targeting phonics skills beyond the CVC level? If you are, and you are targeting skills that are embedded in the oral reading fluency passages and they're still not making that growth, they're coming to school, you're seeing evidence of lack of response and lack of generalization across the curriculum, that tells the team something. So it just really provides good context to look at off grade level and on grade level. So final thoughts. I've been saying that word a lot, but I think it really is important to get context when you're talking about response or lack of response. Response or lack of response to what? What do you mean when you say response? What do you mean when you say they're not responding? What did you expect them to do? What did they actually do? What happened across grade levels and across skill areas? How did it change? Were they able to generalize or not? It can be more complex than monitoring on grade level. I think probably if you're just starting out, monitoring on grade level is probably the way to go, just because it's easier to get fidelity with the psychologist, with the interventionist, if you have interventionists across the district when you're using basic grade level monitoring procedures. And many of the programs these days, like AIMSweb, STAR, all the different things that are out there, are going to have built-in procedures for on grade level. They're going to have graphing mechanisms, and a lot of times they'll have procedures already outlined for off grade level as well. So it just depends on what you're using. You may have to develop your own protocols, but it is more complex. And it is easier for individual psychologists and teams to make mistakes. Okay, so it really will work better if you have progress monitoring tools that allow access to both foundational and applied academic skills, so that if you're at least in the same assessment family and you know that the constructs are similar, like DIVLS will allow you to do it, STAR, AIMSweb, rather than mix matching things, pulling things off of Intervention Central, and you don't know how well things ultimately line up. If it's in the same family and you have access to those foundational skills and the applied skills, it can help your confidence when you are trying to make high stakes decisions. It's easier to support if you have access to a graphing tool. You really need to have some basic tools like a graphing tool, normative and benchmark data that's on a one pager like what we have and I showed you. Clear procedures for staff to follow. Even having something as simple, if you aren't going to have a multi-layered graphing mechanism like we do, having simple things like a countdown calculator that allows you to know at any given time how many weeks are left in the year. That's really going to help you to set that rate of improvement goal. To have that normative chart available, that stuff is key. Particularly, it's like with a Woodcock-Johnson or anything else, a WISC, KTA. If the scores are funny, if you can go back to the manual and try to figure out, well, why perhaps did I get the wrong score? If you've got those normative data available for you, it's really easy to kind of deconstruct what you did and to go back and look and see, did you make a mistake? Or also just to kind of give you an idea of how much variance is there from one percentile band to the next percentile band? How many raw score points difference is there? It's just helpful to have those stuff available when you're going through an RTI, when you're using an RTI model, and when you are off grade level. So I would recommend practicing these procedures and reviewing cases as a psych group with your interventionist, whatever you have in your home district, whatever that looks like for you. Practice this stuff, because we've got the graphing template, we've got access to the one-pager norms and to the countdown calculators and all the fancy tools. But if we don't practice putting it all together on a semi-regular basis, it's easy to have too much confidence in your ability and your peers' abilities to get this right, and then somebody makes a mistake and you don't catch it. So this can be a very perishable skill. And I think it makes a lot of sense to set these up. Even if you have something that does it for you, like an AIMSweb Plus or STAR, you still have to set parameters on those graphing templates that are embedded within those programs. And it makes sense to have someone look over your shoulder to verify that it was done correctly, that everybody understands why the goal is what it is, and to really just embed that as part of your PD and your strategic plan for supporting an instructional model for SLD. Just make sure that you are really taking a look at these technical pieces. So, overall, I mean, we do it here in ABSS because it just helps us better explain what's happening when a student is responding or not responding, when we compare that to what we see on grade level. I think it helps us with our communication with teachers and with the family. And it really is a bit more complex, but you can do it if you have the tools available, and if you if you just take the time to ensure fidelity. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or any of the other members of the SLD training team and ask them. But I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.